Greetings, cartoon connoisseurs, and welcome to the Animation Conversation, where we explore the art form from pencils to pixels. And now, here are your hosts, Rusty Shackleford and F.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Animation Conversation. I'm Rusty here with my co host.
What's up, party people? It's your old pal F.
All right. So today we're going to talk
Party
about
started.
obscure cartoons, obscure
Yeah.
animation. So what have you got for us then? So what is your obscure or unknown cartoons that somebody might not have heard of?
Well, I'm really I'm happy we're finally talking about this again because we started doing this talking about this a few weeks ago, and the internet decided to crap out on us. But yeah, it's kind of weird because animation, unlike live action, is such a tricky thing to put together, and it's so labor intensive and costs so much money and it has so many moving parts to it that it surprises me that there are cartoons that kind of slip through the cracks and kind of go the way of the dodo, and people just kind of forget that they ever existed. um so which is, again, when you consider just how much money and time and effort and labor is spent making cartoons, it surprises me that anything ever disappears. But well, one of the first things I wanted to talk about, I don't know if I can count it as obscure because I know it's got a cult following,
Yeah.
but it was one of the first sort of big things to come from Nelvana, and that is a feature film called Rock and Rule.
Rock and roll. I was going to mention Nelvana period in this obscure thing that we're talking about, because if you go look at their list of everything that they've been a part of, some of it is pretty known, but then you look through their whole list and you're like, well, I've never heard of that, I've never heard of that, I've never heard of that. They have so many unique different things.
Well, it's a Canadian company, and they really did sort of, they were at the cusp of a lot of cartoons, but they've always, they started out, particularly in the 70s and early 80s and whatnot. They did some wonky stuff,
Yeah.
and we're too small town to put up any images because we don't want to get any copyright strikes or anything like that. But just do a Google search, do a Wikipedia search for Rock and Rule, and what was kind of groundbreaking about it was, it came out in 1983, and I remember seeing ads for this as a kid. I was about 13 years old, and it blew my mind because it was very, very clearly not for kids. It was for
Yeah.
grown-ups.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was marginally aware of this thing called heavy metal, that animated movie, but I think I had actually seen bits of heavy metal at the time and found it not to be particularly interesting. Whereas I would see clips for Rock and Rule and be like, "Wow, this is kind of cool looking," but something about the style really freaks me out. Like, it scared me a little
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I was just barely 13, and so seeing cartoons that didn't look like what I had grown up with, in terms of cartoons and what cartoons look like, really threw me for a loop. But it's funny because, I mean, the whole plot of it is, it's like this dystopian post-apocalyptic future where humans are sort of descended from rats and
yeah.
from other animals, so
Yeah.
that they mostly look completely human, especially if you're the hero or the heroine of the movie, in which case, you look much more human, and they're arguably, attractive. And then all the comic reliefs, you can still tell are mutated from rats. But again, it's really dark, and it's really like, it was really groundbreaking, I feel like, for the time. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
got it's got this amazing soundtrack to it. It's got songs by Cheap Trick and Debbie Harry and Lou Reed and Iggy Pop and Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yeah, great soundtrack for sure.
Oh, and again, these were all, again in 1983, people like Lou Reed and Iggy Pop and even Debbie Harry of Blondie fame, you know those were not, those were not your chart toppers. Those were people, that was the punk and post-punk era, so if you listened to those,
Yeah.
you were hardcore. So, again, it was just clear from the very beginning that this movie wasn't made for kids, and it wasn't made for squares, um
Yeah.
and the villain is named Mock Swagger,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that, and he's clearly supposed to be sort of a parody of Mick Jagger. And his whole point is that he's trying to find some secret musical frequency that'll let him rule the world, which is, boy, that is a paper thin plot when you look at it, when you say it out.
Yeah.
And then just discovers some lounge singer who can hit the note, and so of course he's got a kidnapper, and it's, craziness and adventures ensue. But again, whenever I've looked at it since then, even though the plot is arguably kind of silly, and by a lot of criteria that we have today, I mean, there are huge pauses of just really boring areas where not that much happens, and there's not that much in the way, in my opinion, of comic relief or even like action
Yeah.
adventure. And yet, whenever it's on and I start watching it, I can't take my eyes away, because not only is it, again, it's a feature film that at the time the only ones who did animated features were Disney.
Yeah, that was
And
it. Yeah, yeah,
it looks completely like the antithesis of Disney. And so I can't stop looking at it, because I think the art style is really beautiful. Like, I think it's a really cool art style. And Nelvana went on to do, a bunch of other things, and they really tried to, I think, sort of run with this art style and make it their signature for a long time, because they did a bunch of other stuff
yeah. They
where
did.
if you
Yeah.
watch it, you're like, oh, that's them. They did this special called Cosmic Christmas, which would come on every Christmas, and I would insist on watching it, despite the fact that, again, it really kind of freaked me out just by the way it looked. It's these
Yeah.
There's this whole like sort of parallel about three aliens come to Earth, and it's supposed to sort of parallel the three wise men going to Bethlehem, and I forget what it is they're looking for, but the aliens are super freaky. And then they did another thing, I think it was called the Animal Olympics, and I think that was Nelvana.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
again,
They did a lot of crazy stuff.
same thing. But now this is the big one for me. They also did the animated Boba Fett short film for the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And now
yeah.
again,
Yeah, the
it's
very
really
infamous special. Yeah.
it's oh and of course then I believe they also went on to do Star Wars Droids, which was a regular cartoon, and by golly, one that I watched
Yeah.
very quickly. But I mean, they did the first appearance of Boba Fett, and it's on that show, and it's, obviously, you watch the Star Wars Holiday Special, and it is just a fever dream with how bad it is, and how just completely out of it everyone is, and how everyone clearly hates being there.
Yeah,
But
you talk about like weird stuff and weird production studios. There was one that comes to mind for me. So there was Harry Nilsson had an album called The Point. I think it was
Mhm.
his sixth studio album, and they adapted his album into a TV show, not a TV show, but with like an animated feature. But it was the first animated feature ever to air on prime time on U.S. television.
Wow.
So February 2nd, 1971, it was on ABC. It was the ABC Movie of the Week. And it was
Huh.
Fred Wolf. It was Fred Wolf with Murakami and Wolf Productions or Films that did it. So
Oh.
they took Fred's album and they adapted it for TV and they telecasted it 3 times. So the narrators were popular too. So at the time, in 1971, you had Dustin Hoffman who did the first one. It's the height of his career, his popularity. Then you had Alan Barsman, and then you had Alan Thicke who did the third telecast.
Oh my God!
And then for the VHS release, it was Ringo Starr. So they had Ringo Starr on the other one. So what it is, it's about this. The album is about this guy who lives and he has a round head who lives in a pointed world where everybody has pointy heads. And
I remember this.
You remember that? And he has to wear the hat to conceal his pointless condition.
Right.
So yeah. And
oh my gosh.
There's like this evil count or whatever who dishonors him, and he has to do this one-on-one game called the triangle toss where he has to catch triangles on his head, but he has a round head so he can't catch them, kind of thing. So I don't know, that's a really cool one. And there's like this thing called the pointless forest where he gets sent to this forest, and there's these big huge giant bees. They're like bees, bee creatures or whatever. I don't know. That's a really, really good one. I like Fred Wolf. I feel like they've done some really neat, weird stuff. They actually have they back-to-back years. They had two. They had an Academy Award winner, and then they had a nomination the next year. It was one called The Box that came out in 1967, and that's another obscure one. So that one is it's pretty much just retelling the story of Noah's Ark, but set in a bar with an old man who's carrying this box. And people keep coming in the bar and they want to know what's inside of his box. And it's just like it retells the story of Noah, and it's called The Box. It actually it got an Academy Award for the best animated short at the 40th Academy Awards that year. So it's only like a 9-minute little short, but it's really, really good. I imagine you could probably find it on YouTube. I'll actually link it into the description. But you can find it on YouTube. So that's a really, really neat one for sure to watch.
I'm learning more and more. You can find anything on YouTube. Like I've literally I've been on a quest lately because my career started out. I did a lot of like little bits of animation for semi-animated CD-ROMs back in the mid 90s when
I saw your Twitter posts about your Barbie the interactive book CDs. Those were king in 1996 for me, 97 when I was in 3rd grade. I was my teacher realized that I was never going to learn anything with all the other kids because when I moved from England, I'd already been in school for years at that point, and I got put in 1st grade because that's where my age was. So I was ahead of everybody. So when I got to 3rd grade, my teacher was like, "Oh, here's a computer, enjoy this."
Well, somewhere in the mid 90s, like every single franchise had to have a CD-ROM. And it's and I can make fun of them all I want, but I mean, if it weren't for that CD-ROM boom, I probably never would have gotten into animation because that's where I learned how to do things digitally and blah, blah, blah. But no, you can find anything on YouTube because, I brought up, one of the things I worked on was, Barbie magical princess stories or something like that, which I did some character designs for.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wonder if it's on YouTube. And by golly, there it is. And now I'm like scared to look up all the stuff that I used to work on. But anyway,
it's all there. Anything that you worked on, I'm sure it's there. And if you can't find it on YouTube, one of the places where I go to find a lot of obscure things or things that I can't find on YouTube is Internet Archive. The Internet Archive has an infinite amount of things, and it's actually funny. Invader Zim, Yonan Vasquez had taken it and upgraded it to 1080p and uploaded the entire series to Internet Archive underneath his own name or whatever on there. So it was kind of cool to see that creators were, taking advantage of Internet Archive and what it is and what it's like. I think it's a great thing.
Just for the record, because this will come up again, it's Jonan Vasquez.
Jonan Vasquez. Yeah, I'm terrible with names.
It's okay. No, I mean, tons of people at the time when the show first started were like, "Is it Yonan or Jonan?" I'm like, "It's Jonan."
Jonan.
But anyway,
Jonan, okay.
Well, and that's another thing that the term obscure, I feel like doesn't even really mean that much anymore, because
No,
you
it doesn't.
everything has a second life now on YouTube or on the internet somewhere. Like I said, if I can just do a quick search and find the dopey little bits of animation I did for, Barbie as Rapunzel like 20 something years ago, then I imagine everything is there. But what some of the I put a tweet out earlier about some, what are some other stuff that people um had considered obscure and that not a lot of people talk about. And I gotta say, my buddy Calco Beater, Ruby Gloom was one that was a show. And
Ah,
I remember Ruby Gloom as a property, but I don't remember ever seeing a show.
yeah. I don't know. I don't remember anything about that at all. Yeah.
It's little sad goth girl. He described it as kind of sort of a an edgy version of Winnie the Pooh. And then there was Mr. Meaty, which I do remember. That was a Nickelodeon. It was a puppet show.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
it's one of those ones that I feel like, and again, I was an adult, so I wasn't sitting around watching Nickelodeon, but I know that I passed by Mr. Meaty a couple of times, and I love puppets.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it. So it was at the very end of my watching Nickelodeon. I was 15, so it had to really catch my attention for me to watch it. And usually, if I
right,
caught something on Nickelodeon, it was with my little
right,
sister. So I was
right.
watching. I actually have a backpack with face on it. Face here.
Really
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a little. It's a kid's
was
backpack, but I saw it at a thrift store and I bought it. I don't use it for anything but carrying electronics around if I'm traveling. But it's a neat little backpack.
was Mr. Meaty any good?
I thought so. Like I said, I like puppet shows. So
Right,
if you've got puppets, and I think they're they don't even it doesn't even have to be good humor. The puppets can make
yeah,
it funny. The puppets can make
yeah,
it funny itself if you have good puppets. And I thought the puppets were very well crafted puppets. So I don't know. I
yeah.
liked it. It was very funny to me.
Now another one that a friend of mine, Ash, tweeted out, called Doodles, which is Doodlez. And I don't know where exactly it came from, but I do remember seeing little bits of this here and there, and I couldn't tell you what the plot is. But again, it's one of those ones that I'm just looking at the artwork and thinking, wow, this is really cool looking. How is it that I didn't know about this?
Yeah,
It's one thing that for stuff to slip by the gen pop, the average person on the street, it's no wonder some of this stuff slips them by. But I was like
yeah.
knee deep in the industry. This is my job to know some of this stuff,
Some of it,
and
yeah, some of
somehow I
it.
missed it.
Well, you got to think, you're working on what you're working on. A lot of the times, there could have been a million things going on around you, but from what I've seen of the work that you've done that's got your name on it. It seems like, I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you have blinders on to what's going on, and you're just in the zone with what you're creating.
That's a good point, and yet, no, it's the exact opposite. For instance,
Okay.
no, if anything, we get, or at least I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I
Yeah,
know I
yeah, yeah.
wasn't the only one who felt this way. When you're working on something, you almost become hyper aware of what
I
other
got
people are
you.
doing, because one of the things that I remember was a big talking point when we first started working on Invader Zim was Nickelodeon already had this show called Lloyd in Space, which was
Mm.
also kind of obscure. I don't know that a lot of people remembered it.
I remember Lloyd in Space. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it had its following. And again, it's nothing against the cartoon. If it was your favorite cartoon, then bless your heart. It was very, it was a very sweet, very gentle cartoon.
Yeah, it was
And
the Recess guys, the guys that made
yeah, and
Recess.
and,
Yeah.
and again, because we were in the same building, or not in the same building as Lloyd in Space. And I don't even remember if Lloyd in Space was a I don't think it was a Nickelodeon cartoon at all, or maybe it was. I
No,
honestly,
it was on ABC Saturday mornings. It was
okay,
Disney
right.
Disney
I remember there was chatter about, oh dear, there's an existing green alien kids
Space
show
show.
already
Yeah,
out
yeah.
there. Right. How is our green alien kids show gonna compete. And of course, we were all just like, these two shows could not be any more different.
Yeah, they're very
And
different shows for sure.
we were already pretty sure that Zim was gonna blow Lloyd in space out of the water with not a lot of effort. So we no, when we're working on stuff, we like a lot of us are aware of what's going on. And one of the things that when I got my first short picked up, it was Butch Hartman who pointed, because it was called The Tantrum and it was a kid superhero, and I had a design for him where he was in, red footy pajamas and a blue cape and yellow insignia on the front of his pajamas. And it was Butch Hartman who pointed it out to me. It's like, there's a whole series of CD-ROM storybooks called Pajama Sam. And even though the character didn't look anything like my character, the costume was exactly the same. So not only did I have to change the costume and change the look of the character, I had to research Pajama Sam to make sure that we weren't doing the same thing, because animation has a history of stuff coming out that's at least thematically identical, where you're almost certain it's not one studio ripping off the other. Like there was Ants and a Bug's Life came out at very close at the same time, and it was just one of those things where nobody was ripping anybody else off, I don't think. But people just get ideas, and studios run with things that are inexplicably similar. So you almost have to be aware of what's going on out there, lest you do something. If you talk to enough comedians, you'll talk to them and they'll be like, oh yeah, so and so told the exact same joke that I just got done telling on stage. And even though they know for a fact it was nobody ripping anybody else off, it's just people have similar thoughts and people come to similar conclusions. So yeah, no, it's one of those things that as a creator, I wound up just sort of going, you know what, I need to create and pitch my stuff, and if I try and give any thought to what else is out there, then the whole process just becomes miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the it brings me to another one then. So there was it's got a really creepy spider on it. I used to watch it with my sister. It was called Mr. Spider's Sunny Patch Friends, and it had a really creepy male spider. He was like the mean neighbor, like the like the Mr. Wilson, kind of thing. Like, oh, right. What are you kids doing in my neighborhood? Where he had good intentions, but he just, he didn't know how to come across in the right way, kind of thing. And
did he though? Did he?
I don't know, probably not. But the character is a really menacing looking character for a kid show. It's just a terrifying looking spider.
Wow.
I can't remember the spider's name, but I don't know. It's just really terrifying.
Now, see, my other buddy Zach, he pointed out Robot Boy.
Oh, Robot Boy, yeah.
Cartoon Network show, and I almost don't want to count that as being obscure, because I feel like a lot of people loved Robot Boy, and it was one of those things that, again, I'm not sure if they were on at exactly the same time, but or if productions were going on at the same time. But I mean, at my life as a teenage robot, we were aware of Robot Boy, because even though, again, the two characters are really nothing alike when you look at their personalities, they're both robots navigating a human world, and they've both got this, light gray blue color scheme. So,
yeah.
Again, we're just like, what? Of course, So, let's see what. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go grab something from my collection. Talk about something for a second.
And here we go.
Think of another cartoon that. Well, you were talking about. You only briefly touched on a while back when we were talking to Pinky, Dawnstar.
Brave Star. Yeah.
Oh, Brave Star. Sorry.
Brave Star. Yeah. So Brave Star is it's actually I misquoted who it was created by the last time that we had talked about it. So last time we talked about it, I said it was Hanna-Barbera, but it's actually Filmation. So it was the last animated series produced by Filmation. Said. You did say Filmation, and I corrected you, and I was wrong. So it was actually Filmation, and it was the last Filmation.
Wow. Well,
So
Filmation did a bunch of Filmation was another one of those studios that sort of um made their bones by doing cartoons where they created a handful of cycles for a character and just reused them over and over and over again. Like they tried to
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah, they did,
they tried
yeah,
to out cheat Hanna-Barbera
yeah,
by,
yeah.
because they did things like Zorro and Tarzan and a handful of others, and they would literally just, I mean, Hanna-Barbera got famous for reusing walk cycles and stuff like that, but man, Filmation really like outdid them. And
Yeah,
yet I watched
Filmation did a
them
lot of that.
faithfully. So speaking of really obscure stuff, I can't believe I found this recently. One of my earliest influences, just as a cartoonist in general, forget about animation, but just as a storyteller, um, I really loved the comic strip Doonesbury, even
Doonesbury.
when I was at an age that I really had no business even reading Doonesbury because it was extremely political.
It was
And
very political, and it's funny that you mentioned that Doonesbury being something that you remember reading. So uh, I was an odd kid as well. I guess we're both odd people. That's why we connect so well. So I used to read the newspaper as soon as I could read. As soon as I was able to read, I started reading the newspaper. So it was a big ritual for me to get the newspaper, and the first thing I wanted to read in it was
oh yeah,
always the comic strip. So I would grab the newspaper, I would rifle through it, and my dad always wanted the crossword. So I had to get to it before my dad wanted the crossword because the crossword was always attached to the funny pages. So
yeah.
I would have to like hurry up, get the paper, get through it, read the comics, and then surrender it to the crossword puzzle gods. And Doonesbury was the one that made me aware of politics. Period.
Yeah.
At a really early age, and I just really liked it. It's a really good comic.
Well, and people forget that there was a time in this country where the Sunday funnies, those were your Saturday morning cartoons, because there were
Yeah,
no Saturday morning cartoons. And
yeah,
man, oh man, if you go back and you look at um, some of the earliest comic strips from the earliest parts of the last century, things like Little Nemo and Slumberland and Crazy Cat and Ignatz, and my goodness, the original Popeye comic strips
Popeye comics.
were Machiavellian in their complexity and just beautifully drawn and huge. They would like one strip would take up an entire newspaper page, and they were
Yeah.
just gorgeous. But so yeah, right when I was a young teenager, I didn't get what the characters in Doonesbury were talking about when it came to politics, but I loved the character interaction. And unlike most of the other comic strips that I loved at the time, it was all people, and it was just people living their everyday lives. And I remember thinking, that's super cool. It's that this is a comic strip about just kind of regular young people. Well, you want to talk about obscure animation? They did an
Oh
animated
wow.
special, and I found this. I think it was at an Amoeba Records in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's awesome. I love
And
VHS tapes.
yeah, it's, you want to talk about your lost media, a Doonesbury special.
Yeah, that is
And
special.
again, it's an animated version of the comic strip, and again, for the time,
I
it
have
followed the art
for
style.
obscure, I have dinosaurs, the claymation tape dinosaurs, and also have the California raisins somewhere in here.
Right. Yeah, it's and now what's funny is shortly after my years of being obsessed with Doonesbury, Bloom County as a comic strip started, which was also, it was a little more humor based and less political, but still very topical.
Yeah.
And that wound up being like Doonesbury was very close to me sort of going, oh wow, maybe this is what I want to do. But then Bloom County came out, and I was just like, oh, this is about 1,000 times funnier. And it was a little more lighthearted. It didn't hit you over the head with the politics quite so heavily. So, but then Bloom County went on to be pretty much as popular as Doonesbury. and they would get, and people would accuse Burke Breathed, the guy who created Bloom County, they would accuse him of ripping off Gary Trudeau, who created Doonesbury. But later on, they would wind up doing and it was at the height of Bloom County's popularity that, and I forget which company did it. It might have been, I'm not even going to say, but they did a Bloom County Christmas special called a Wish for Wings
Okay.
at Work.
Yeah.
And I just remember reading an interview with Burke Breathed where he was like, because Opus the Penguin at that point, Opus the Penguin dolls friggin' everywhere, Opus and Bill the Cat, and I just remember him saying in an interview that everyone is just freaking out about what kind of voice to give Opus, because he had become such a beloved character in everyone's head. And when you're reading something, you know, you're hearing a voice in your head that you think this is the voice of this character. And so, you know, when you commit to animating something and you give them a voice, you run the risk of everybody looking at that going, that's not what he sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I remember sort of thinking the same thing when they very first decided to do a Garfield cartoon. But boy, by golly, they couldn't have nailed it any better than who they got for that. So
Yeah. No, they did pretty good. Rockadoodle. What do you know about
yeah,
Rockadoodle?
you were
Yeah.
talking. That was a Bluth.
Yeah. Bluth one. And well, my mom is a huge Elvis fan,
Uh-huh.
so I was kind of drawn to that movie for that. And for people who have never seen it, it's this rooster who has been told his whole life that he's the reason why the sun comes up. So he spends his whole life, amped up to wake the sun up, and then he oversleeps one night or something like that, or somebody drugs him or something, and he sleeps through the sun coming up, and he wakes up and he sees the sun's up, and he's walking around, and he's just so disenfranchised by this sun being up, and it's not him. So he goes to town, and when he goes to town, he becomes like this big rock star or whatever. And it's about these sinister owls and stuff for the bad guys. That's a really, really good one. I like that one a lot.
Right. Somebody just pointed out on Twitter that, you know, one obscure cartoon that very few people know about that I had a really big hand in creating was the Bob and Doug McKenzie animated series, which I don't know if I feel like we've talked about it, but maybe we haven't. And you're probably a little too young to remember who Bob and Doug McKenzie were, but they were sort of Wayne and Garth before Wayne and Garth were.
Okay.
They were on SCTV, which is Second City Television, and it was,
I know what SCTV is for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
it preceded Saturday Night Live, and it was a lot of these, like, you know, comedy improv players from the 60s and 70s who put together a TV show. And two of the recurring characters on it were Bob and Doug McKenzie, who were these
Yeah.
just sort of um you know the Canadian version of Hicks. You know, they were
Yeah.
two simpletons, and they did it, but they were hugely popular characters, and they did a movie that was awesome called Strange Brew, which, if you're ever in the mood for just something bizarre, it's and wonky, that's a great viewing experience. But yeah, I got hired to
Oh, that's Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas.
yeah, Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas,
Yeah.
and it's, I mean, Bob and Doug McKenzie, those are the characters that Rick Moranis, I mean, that's where his career got its start. So
Yeah, for sure.
Dave Thomas has been around for a long time too, and just done a ton of stuff. He's this, you know, he again, with the original cast of Saturday Night Live, he's kind of comedy royalty. And
Yeah, he was in Stripes. That's where I remember him from, his Stripes and
Dave
Coneheads.
Dave Thomas himself, you know, hired me to be a supervisor on the Bob and Doug McKenzie animated show. And
That's awesome.
I would literally, because the production was in trouble and they needed someone to sort of unify and supervise all the storyboards and all that stuff. And so I remember it very clearly. It was, you know, one of those days he was going over my boards, and he was saying something like, "Why don't all the boards look like this? How come and I said to him, I'm like, Dave, I can fix this for you. You hire me as a supervisor and I'll make sure that all this stuff." And he's
Yeah.
like, "I'm listening. What are you proposing?" And I was like, "Every week you and I get together and we sit and we go over the script. And while we go over the script, I will draw out the show in thumbnail storyboard form. And that way you're approving it as we go along. And he loved it. And so for several months, I got to sit next to Dave Thomas and just
That's
bang out
awesome.
stories. And there was a period there for a while where the Bob and Doug show was available online, but now I can't find it anymore. But it's really good. It was kind of ahead of its time.
Yeah. So I looked it up. Yeah, so that was it premiered on in Canada, right? April 19th or something like that, 2009.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it'd be cool to be able to try to find that. I'm gonna see if I could. I don't know. It might be. I bet if it's going to be anywhere to be found, it'd probably be found on Internet Archive. I bet somebody's
Yeah.
got it on there, maybe. But I don't know. That's pretty cool. Yeah. That's an inside story. There we go.
Oh, for
That's a
sure.
cool
Well,
one.
and
That's a cool one.
again, by the way, thank you to everyone on Twitter, Isaiah and Eeyore and George and all these other people who have sent in suggestions for stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for
I'm
sure.
not going to go through every one of them, but again, it's what's weird is I keep seeing stuff with really terrific art styles to it, and I'm just like, man, I can't believe I didn't notice this like at the time.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff out there for sure. There's a really weird one, and I guess it's not that popular for a reason, but it was called Fish Police.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember.
So so it actually it started as a comic book
Yep.
series. Steve Moncuse, I believe is how you say his name, and
Hmm.
then they adapted it for an animated TV series. It was actually Hanna-Barbera that did it, and
Right.
1992. So what it was is this was Hanna-Barbera's attempt at this is CBS's attempt at challenging The Simpsons at the time, Capital Critters, Family Dog. So this was like all these primetime animated shows. So they developed this show to like go against it. And there's this fish. His name is Inspector Gill, and he works for Chief Abalone at the police department, and they're solving various crimes while tangling with the mob boss Biscotti Calamari.
Of course.
So it's a really cheesy film noir stuff, and like the Inspector Gill, he does all these detective film noir type
Yeah, yeah.
tropes and stuff like that. And it's funny because it's John Ritter who does that voice of him,
Huh.
and there's this shark lawyer in there who's voiced by Tim Curry, and then there's a dim-witted, overweight bodyguard of Calamari called Muscles Marinara, who's
Right.
Voiced by Frank Welker. So it's got some people in here. Hector Elizondo, he's the one who voices the crime boss. So it's got some pretty well-known people. John Winters was also
Yeah.
Buddy Hackett voiced somebody in there. So it's crazy the amount of like great cast it had.
Yeah.
It had Joe Beth Williams from the Poltergeist movies. So
Right.
I don't know. I guess it was probably just a really crap premise. You know what I mean?
Well,
A
you
fish
mean a really
detective.
you mean a really carp premise.
Yeah.
But see,
Yeah.
that's a problem with shows like that. It's like once you get past, all the fish jokes, what are you left with?
Yeah.
And it's funny, my mentor over at Nickelodeon, Larry Huber, who was the co-creator of Chalk Zone, which itself could almost be categorized as obscure. He was a director on Fish Police, and I remember being aware of the graphic novels, and I remember the graphic novels being very sort of considered very hipster for the time in the
Yeah.
90s. And what I remember when the cartoon came out, I remember thinking this looks absolutely zero like the comic, and I was not a huge fan of the comic, so I can't really judge it too harshly
Yeah.
one or the other in that regard. But I feel like there was a period there where, and by all accounts there was a period there especially in the mid to late 90s, where if you had an even moderately successful independent comic, somebody from Hollywood was calling you up and trying to license it for animation.
Yeah.
And Fish Police just reminded me that one of those things that did get made and was pretty good, but not nearly as good as the comics, was one called Sam and Max Freelance Police,
Okay.
created by Steve Purcell. And man, the now the art style of it is, in fact, hang on.
Oh, here we go. Another inside look.
Now, again, you want to see, this is, if you go back to the first episode of this show, folks, you will hear me swear that I'll never ever prepare for this show, and so I'm proving that to be the case. Not only was Sam and Max a great series of comics and a really good TV show, it was this ROM game, and this wound up being a huge click game. Sam and Max Hit the Road kind of revolutionized, point and click games. And, you can just play this game and it's like watching a really funny cartoon of those two characters. And it was on the success of this CD-ROM game that they made the cartoon. So, fun fact, you'll see it's a LucasArts.
Oh, LucasArts game. Yeah, they make a lot of good games. So actually, go ahead.
It was this game that made me look up LucasArts when I was still living in Michigan and think to myself, hey, I wonder if they're, I had been working in CD-ROMs for the past 4 or 5 years at that time. And I was looking to, move onward and upward. And so I got a hold of LucasArts and they're like, well, we're expanding our CD-ROM division. We won't fly you out here, but if you move out here, we'll interview you. And so it was LucasArts Interactive that wound up being the sort of impetus I took upon myself to move to or to travel to California just to go on this interview with these people. And the creator of this, Steve Purcell's wife, was the woman who interviewed me for the job. And she was the one who was like, we really like your work. We think you're terrific, but we're awesome. Full up. But we're totally full up. But it was on that trip that driving back from this was at LucasArts in San Francisco. Driving back from that trip, the big animation convention was going on in LA. That was, and I've told this story before, that was the occasion where I was like, oh, screw it, I'm going to pull over and I'm going to go to the animation convention. And that's where I met all the people from the Wild Thornberrys. And that's really where my career started. So all these things are connected and
connected together. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, they did the Grim Fandango game. I like that. They just did a re-release of that Grim Fandango. And then they did the Secret of Monkey Island games too. They did re-releases of them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, see, again, cool, the same guy, Steve Purcell, I believe, did all the design work on things like Monkey Island. And that's what at the time, I mostly just wanted to do character designs. And the idea of doing character designs for these interactive CD-ROM games just seemed like heaven on earth to me.
Yeah.
And yet now looking back, it's like, it's funny the way things went. But I remember again, back in the 90s, if you had an independent comic with funny characters in it, practically everybody got a call from Hollywood saying, hey, can we make a cartoon of your characters? And I don't know if you've ever heard of Milk and Cheese by Evan Dorkin.
No, I've never heard of that one. I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's literally the premise of the comic strip is their dairy products gone bad, and it's this wedge of cheese and carton of milk who are anthropomorphized, I guess you would say, and they commit horrible acts of violence, all the while drinking hard liquor and brandishing, torturous weapons. And he famously even got a call from someone at either Jim Henson or one of the, Nickelodeon or something like that, saying, we're interested in adapting Milk and Cheese. And he was like, the characters are alcoholics, right? And they're like, wait, what?
What? Yeah.
So, I mean, literally in the 90s, the point is literally in the 90s, they would, as legend has it, you'd get the call and they wouldn't even research your stuff. They wouldn't even bother. They were just out for the next big thing.
Yeah. Well, it was funny that you mentioned Purcell and Nelvana in the same conversation, and Sam and Max, because Purcell joined with the story editor Dan Smith from Nelvana, are the ones who created the Adventures of Sam and Max Freelance Police cartoon show. So they actually
Yeah,
partnered with Nelvana. So that was funny how just how it all kind of tied in.
yeah, man,
Yeah.
oh man, it all time. See, now some other people are sending in stuff. Let's see.
I think he's with Pixar now. He works with Pixar.
I'm glad because his art style is amazing, and he created Sam and Max, and or actually, I think as legend has it, his brother created it, but like his
Yeah.
art style is amazing and just really appealing. Somebody sent in the Mighty Bee. I don't know if I count that as obscure either, but I guess it is because it didn't last for very long. Do you remember the Mighty Bee?
I don't know. I've never heard of the Mighty Bee. I'm gonna check that. I'm gonna type that one in.
It
I've never
was
seen that one.
a Nickelodeon show. It had a lot of people, a lot of really super talented people worked on that show. Some really good friends of mine. Yeah, we
Oh,
were on screen.
some really talented
2002.
voice actors. Andy Richter's on there. He's on there too, and then
Andy
Gary
Richter, and
Delisle.
it was created by, and I'm blanking on her name. You're the one who's good at research.
Oh, it was created by Amy Poehler.
Amy Poehler, yeah,
Yeah,
and
Cynthia
and
True, and then Eric Weiss also had help in it.
right, right, and I knew both those folks. They worked, I think, at various times on Fairly Odd Parents, so I would see them every day, and eventually, yeah, they with Amy Poehler sold the Mighty Bee, and I know a lot of like, or at least I think a lot of like people there was sort of crossover from there were some Invader Zim people, there were some Ren and Stimpy people, there were some, just all of the cream of the crop
Yeah,
did that show, and yet yeah, never, even with the star power of Amy Poehler behind it, just never kind of took off.
yeah, she's funny too. I really like Amy Poehler. I think she's
You know what,
hilarious.
I'm gonna go ahead and judge that that's not obscure because um they, like, Nickelodeon pushed the hell out of that show.
They had 40 episodes. I mean, it's
Yeah,
two
yeah. So I
seasons,
mean,
40 episodes over two seasons, 39 segments and 35 segments over
yeah,
the 40 episodes. I mean, that's substantial.
that's
I guess that's a lot of stuff to watch.
that's a respectable run. And again,
Yeah.
I remember Nickelodeon pushed the living hell out of it. Like they got in your home and they ordered you to watch the Mighty Bee. So
And it's not like it wasn't like, critically acclaimed either. They were nominated for 6 Annies. It was nominated for 2 Daytime Annies. It won
yeah,
Outstanding Individual Achievement in
yeah,
Animation. It was nominated for an Artios, and then it won a Golden Reel. So
yeah,
it was like you said, it was done by people who knew what they were doing. So
yeah. Well, and then
yeah.
there's, I guess, if we're talking about obscure, I did one. I did the pilot for a show called Super Noobs, which was a Cartoon Network show. It was about a group of kids who get some space artifacts that give them powers, and suddenly they become Earth's defenders. It's sort of like if you and your group of friends were given Green Lantern rings.
Oh,
And
okay. That was the guy who did Johnny Test and
yeah,
Ned's Declassified,
yep,
Big Time Rush, 100 Things to Do Before High School.
yeah,
Okay, all right. Scott
yeah,
Fellows, yeah, Scott
yeah.
Fellows.
Scott, he created it, and I did the pilot for it. And again,
That's awesome.
didn't didn't uh, didn't get a huge following. I actually thought that it had I thought that it had the ingredients for something that could have been successful. And
I'm gonna have to check
what's
it out.
funny is, as we're talking about both Nelvana and obscure cartoons, I think probably the most and this will be my last sort of entry into this discussion. One of the most paradoxically obscure cartoons I ever worked on was the Fairly Odd Parents, because apparently, and I'm literally just discovering this, apparently Nelvana was part owner of the Fairly Odd Parents for the first 3 or 4 seasons,
Hmm.
and I had no idea. But I what I can so a lot of times, that's why it can sometimes be aired. In other countries, they'll air the Fairly Odd Parents on Disney Plus or Paramount Plus. Like Fairly Odd Parents can be all over the map because I think it's partially owned by Nelvana, or at least the first few seasons are. And I had zero idea, but it makes sense looking back because, again, at the time that Fairly Odd Parents was gearing up, everyone at the studio thought that Invader Zim was going to be the show that was going to go on for 1,000 seasons. Nobody thought, or at least this was the impression that I got, nobody at Nickelodeon thought that the Fairly Odd Parents was going to be a bombastic hit, let alone go to like whatever 300 episodes, so very largely, I don't think people at the studio were paying that much attention to it. And consequently, I think that's why the first few seasons of that show are as good as they are.
Yeah, for sure.
Nobody was bothering us because everyone had their eyeballs. In a weird way, Invader Zim wound up being sort of a sacrificial lamb for us because people thought Invader Zim was going to be a bombastic hit, which, I mean, by all accounts it was, but just didn't last that many seasons. But not only did everyone at the studio think Zim was going to be this huge hit, there was half the studio loved the Invader Zim, and then the other half was scared of it, so they kept their eyes on it at all times. So while Invader Zim had a million, sort of studio executives constantly, going over it with a fine-tooth comb, we over at Fairly Odd Parents just got to do whatever we do, and because we weren't doing anything particularly controversial, we got to have a little more creative freedom in that regard. So,
well, from what I read here, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could verify this. So Nelvana actually still holds all the rights to the first 5 seasons outside of the United States. Internationally, they own the first 5 seasons for Fairly Odd Parents.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so I think that's reason why I don't think they let go of that intentionally. I think Nelvana holds that because of the success. Maybe that's why they don't have the whole thing, is because it did get popular and successful after those first 5 seasons. And Nickelodeon was like, well, we did a 5-year deal with you. We're gonna go ahead and figure out how to internationally distribute this elsewhere so we make more money off of it. So I imagine it's probably a big money thing. That's kind of interesting that Nelvana still holds those rights. Yeah, that's interesting.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we could do a whole. This is perhaps a topic that we should do from time to time, because for all the ones I did cover, I know there's more that I didn't.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's interesting for sure. Yeah, no, just hearing some insider stuff. I know everybody appreciates that insider, those little stories and stuff, especially about just shows like Super Noobs. If you would have never, if you would have never have told me, I would have never have known. Even if I'd seen the show, I would have never have known that you worked on it. That kind of thing. So that's kind of cool stuff to know.
Again, when I first picked up and moved out of Los Angeles, there was a period there where practically all I was doing were pilots, and so, of the pilots I did, Super Noobs is one of the few that, actually made it to series. I did you want to talk about obscure, I did a million pilots that no one's ever going to know anything about because they're just, they're never going to see the light of day. And okay, I guess I'll mention one more. There's one that I did for Nicktoons Online called A Boy and His Dude, and it's about a kid. It's sort of a well-worn premise where a kid sort of shaves his dog so that the dog can go to school with him and pretends that it's his best friend. His dog's name is Dude, blah 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 blah. And it was pretty good. But again, never went anywhere. Probably because there's been, I feel like, at least 2 other shows with the exact same premise. So.
Yeah, I found it again on YouTube. It's on Nick Animated Short. They actually have it on their YouTube page.
Yeah, no, it's out there.
That's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. That it actually looks really cool. I mean, like you said, it's a tired trope, but I still think that's like a boy and his ex. You know what I mean? Like whatever that is. But I don't know. I kind of like it. I think it's kind of it's kind of campy.
Little if you the folks at home decide to look that up, fun fact about that show, there is a character on the show that is designed after someone that I used to work with who just hated my guts, And so at every conceivable opportunity throughout, and by the way, made my life miserable as a result. I anytime I'm given the opportunity, I take it to put this person in a cartoon and portray them as unflatteringly as possible. And while I was making this cartoon, one of the other people who worked on it was like, wow, this background character here, this looks an awful lot like so and so. And I'm like, that's exactly who it is. And they were like, oh my gosh, you know so and so? I'm like, yeah, they made my life miserable. Me too. And so it was, I have a really good laugh over that. So if you look it up, check that out. But all right, that is now officially my final entry. By the way, thank you to everyone on Twitter who reached out and gave us some more suggestions. We should do this again, and we'll
yeah, we should. I like this.
Call out on Twitter, and we'll have a whole list ready.
Yeah, well, because there's so much stuff out there, and the more I dig, and it's not that it's overwhelming at all, but it's just so much great stuff that I find. And the thing for me is I had a gap of time where I wasn't really, watching television. I was worried about working, and I was a young dad, so I had my kid, my first kid at 20, so I was just too busy working and just worried about other things than watching cartoons. So there's a whole slew of cartoons that I'm catching up on too that I didn't watch because what cartoons I did watch were Squidbillies and Robot Chicken and stuff like that. I'm a really big Squidbillies fan. I'm a big Unknown Henson fan. As controversial as he is, I'm a big fan of his voice and what he did with it.
His voice is unmistakable. No,
yeah.
Now, see, you just reminded me again. You want to talk about obscure cartoons that I worked on? One of the most obscure cartoons ever to have given birth to some of the most successful cartoons ever was Oh Yeah Cartoons. That's where I got my start, and that's where Butch Hartman got his big break, and that's where Rob Renzetti created My Life as a Teenage Robot. Seth MacFarlane created a show for Oh Yeah Cartoons, and yet whenever I mention Chalk Zone, whenever I mention Oh Yeah Cartoons, nobody knows what I'm talking about. So
yeah. No, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know that's only Seth MacFarlane stuff too. They don't know about his short on there. A lot of people just associate Seth MacFarlane with all this raucous and profane stuff when he actually started, as a young guy trying to get his show on. Like everybody else. And your name is, if you go to the Oh Yeah Cartoons page, you can see John Fountain, Antoine Gabard. I mean, your name's right there with everybody. So
I got in.
That's awesome.
I got my cartoon for Oh Yeah Cartoons got the last slot of the last season. So I really slipped that in under the radar.
Yeah.
But anyway.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this episode up. So again, everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Animation Conversation. This was our obscure cartoon episode. So we're going to do more of these.
Yeah. Zigga zigga ah, party people.
All righty. And that's been another conversation with me and F here. Thanks, guys.
And that brings us to the end of another incredible episode of Animation Conversation. We hope you enjoyed this animated adventure as much as we did. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to us on our social media channels or through good old-fashioned email. We value your input and want to make Animation Conversation a podcast that resonates with animation lovers like you. Our Instagram and Twitter are @AnimationConvo. Our YouTube is @AnimationConversation. Our email is theanimationconvo@gmail.com. Before we say our final goodbyes, we want to remind you to stay animated. Keep exploring, appreciating, and sharing the magic of animation with others. Let your imagination soar and let the world of animated wonders continue to inspire and captivate you. Thank you once again for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, this is Wubcake, signing off for Animation Conversation. Keep watching, keep dreaming, and keep the animation conversation alive.